So in this video, we're going to be applying the tools and techniques that you've been learning about to retouch a portrait. So you can either use this file that I've provided, it's the same file I'll be working on today, or you can use your own. If you do use your own, it must be of good quality, meaning it must be in focus and high resolution, and it has to be a close-up. Don't try to use a photo that's taken from far away and crop it in. Alright, so you'll be watching my video, but if you want to read what I'm going through as well, you can click here to access the web page, which will take you right here. Alright, so the goal when we're retouching portraits is to be subtle. This isn't some, high fashion or fantasy type of artwork that we're doing in Photoshop at this point. You'll have a chance to do stuff like that later. Right now, we're just working on, if you're like a portrait photographer, you take a photo of a person and you're gonna do some slight edits to make them look like they would on their very best day possible. So that's gonna mean taking out little things like zits that aren't usually there, taking out little issues like glares. If you look on her cheek and her nose here, they're gone from over here. And just little issues like that. We're not trying to make her look into someone else. She needs to look like who you photographed. If you're getting hired to photograph people, they want photos of themselves, not some weird version of themselves. So they still need to look like them. Alright, so first off we're going to open the image. Let's go ahead and do that. And I have the image here. I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop it onto my Photoshop icon here. And it's opening up in Camera Raw. So the only thing I'm really going to change for my global edits, if you remember, global edits are edits that are applied to the entire image, while local edits are just applied to small areas of the image. For my global edits, I'm going to play with my white balance a bit. So I'm going to grab my white balance eyedropper over here. And luckily there is this little bit of gray. We were shooting against this rusty shed, but there was a little bit of gray. So I'm going to click there. And you can see that it has added a whole lot of blue in there. And it has much cooler tone, which is a correct white balance. I do want to bring back a little bit of that warmth because we were shooting during the golden hour when the sun is really low and you get that really nice golden look. So I'm just going to bring back a little bit of that. Okay, and I don't want it to be a super yellow like when we first opened it, but I do want to have that golden look still there. Now, if you're working on your own file, this is a good time where you can correct any exposure issues, such as if things were, you had some areas that were completely blown out, too bright. I have a very small area on her earring. I'm not too worried about that. It's not an important part of her face. A couple little areas that are completely black in her hair, but nothing really to worry about. So I'm fine with this. Alright, so now that I'm ready to go ahead and move on with this, I'm actually going to change something right down here, which is something that we're going to talk about in the next lecture. I'm going to come up here and change this so that the space I'm working with, the color space, is ProPhoto RGB, and I'm working in 16 bits per channel. This is something that, like I said, there's going to be a couple lectures that explain exactly what all this means. Don't worry about it too much for now, but you can go ahead and change this as well. So I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to come over here to open. And if you remember in the book, there was some talk about how you can also open as an object or open as a copy. Open as an object means it's a smart object, which means you'd be able to double click on a little icon on the bottom of the thumbnail and open this back up in Camera Raw. Now this is something that like some of my colleagues are dead set that this is the way to work. For this, I'm actually just going to open it. I don't really see any reason why I'm going to go back into Camera Raw for this. I'm happy with the exposure. White balance looks great. I'm not really going to worry about that. So I'm just going to click open. You might find in your own workflow, the more you work in Photoshop, that you might want to open as object, and that's completely fine. We have different options because people work differently. Alright, so let's move on. Alright, so something that is really good to do is to start off by analyzing the image and making notes of problems that you want to go ahead and correct. Now, if this was like a commercial shoot where you were shooting for a client like a magazine or something, the art director and other people might be involved in this whole part, and they might be standing over your shoulder telling you what they want to correct. So this could be an important part of a workflow, especially if you go into more professional settings. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, and I'm going to bring up my brush by hitting B. I'm going to go ahead and switch my color. Let's go to red. And I'm going to make my brush a lot smaller. And some areas we want to take care of. I have, there's some acne here. We want to take out these little things here. If you get really close, you can see that we have some areas with her eyebrows that need a little help. Let's see, what else do we have? A little bit of acne down here, not that much. And something else I wanted to take care of is, to me, what was so helpful before, this gray area is actually a little distracting to me. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of all these things. Now this could be a really nice thing to have here to go back and make sure that all the things you noticed you wanted to work on, that you have taken care of them by the end. So I'm going to turn that off for now. Alrighty. Let's duplicate our background. And this is something that I just always do. I don't know if it might be kind of old school now, but just in case there's ever an issue and I mess up here, I have the original background down here. So instead of having to find the file again, reopen it, do any camera raw stuff again, I have my background here. It's locked. Nothing's happening to it. And if I'm going to do anything, it's going to be to this copy. Alright, and as a general rule, as you make new layers, rename them so that you know what they were there for, and you can come back to them later. For this assignment, you have to rename them for full credit. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our spot healing brush tool. So I have my background copy. I'm going to make one more copy because I'm paranoid like that, and I'm going to double click this and rename this spot healing. And usually I would just have one layer for all of my little healing, retouching type of things. I'm going to have you do separate layers for each tool so that when you turn this in, I can see that you tried all the tools. Alright, so I'm going to start by using my spot healing brush tool. And I'm going to hit J to bring that up. And I'm going to zoom in by hitting Command plus a couple times. And what I like to do with an image is I like to start off in a corner to see if there's issues up here and move up and down and then to the side. So I'm going to, just to show you guys real quick, I'm going to do some spot healing on her skin, and then I will start with my usual routine and then speed up the video so you're not sitting there watching me spot heal every little thing. So what I'm looking for are areas of a lot of contrast. So here's like a white spot and with not a lot of white around her. That's an area of high contrast that's noticeable. So if I click there, it goes away. I'm gonna this a little bit larger. And when you're doing blemishes, you don't want to take out things that are always there. For example, this mole is part of her face. Don't take that out. But these little flecks of mascara that have fallen off, take those out. Okay, let's see. A couple other rules before I speed up is make your brush a bit larger than the object you're trying to heal. You can use the bracket keys as you go. And if you need to move around, remember you can hold down the space bar, which gives you a hand tool, then you can click and drag. And then if the tool doesn't do a good job in a particular place, you can hit Command Z and try it again. If there is some issues, if it's still not working out, you can try using different types. We have proximity match on right now. So proximity match means it's taking an area that's close to it and trying to match it up. There's also content aware and create texture. I would usually stick with proximity match. Content aware might be helpful if there's an issue. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and speed up and go ahead and do some spot healing. All right, so if you're noticing on this area here, there was quite a bit of stuff going on. Let me turn off this layer so you can see. And I'm just kind of working from the outside in to get this cleaned up. I didn't just start right in the middle, because if I did, then it would just be pulling to the other areas that are an issue next to it. So just a tip when you're working on an area with a lot of issues like this. Okay, and something else that's going on here is that this area, there's so much, white glare happening here. I'm actually going to use my patch tool in a little bit for this. So I cleaned up as much as I could around the edges, because I'm going to come in with the patch tool and tell it to use another area close to this to clean that up. I tried doing a couple things and it just kind of looks funky. Actually, that one didn't look too bad. So you can try to do some of it, but once you get into larger areas like this, another tool is probably going to be more helpful. So we'll come back to that in a minute. For hairs, you're going to want a pretty small brush, because you don't want to go over the entire area. It gets confused and starts adding hairs sometimes. So make sure you go to a smaller brush when you're trying to take out hairs. Alright, so you should have spent a pretty good amount of time on this, at least 10-ish minutes, I would say. And this is the point when doing this kind of work can kind of start wearing on your hands and wrists. So make sure that you take a break whenever it starts hurting. Take a quick stretch, maybe go walk around the neighborhood or the house or whatever you can for a minute, and let your hand rest for a moment. Okay, so now that we have done the healing brush tool, the spot healing tool. Oh, I do want to mention something about the healing brush tool. We played with that a little bit. It's very similar to the spot healing tool, except you tell Photoshop where to heal from. So in this exercise, I really didn't have to use it, but I just want to let you guys know that it is available. And let me just show you how it would work. Let's say, so here is the healing brush tool, and if I hold down Alt, it will let me choose where to pick from. So I can click here, and then click here, and then it will add it. It's like a cloning stamp, but it also heals, it blends. And that's the big difference between this and the cloning stamp tool. Alright, so if you're having issues and it's not, like, if you're trying to heal and it's not picking up from the right place, you can use this tool instead to better direct it on where to pick up from. Okay, so now that we're done with the hot spot healing brush tool, we're going to go ahead and use the patch tool to try to take care of some of these issues. Now go ahead and make another copy of this layer here. I'm going to hit Command J and double click on here and put patch tool so that we have a new layer. And I can see that you guys are playing with this, and then you can see the differences going back and forth. Alright, so for the patch tool, I'm going to select an area. Let's do this first. And if you didn't select enough of an area, you can hold down Shift and see the little plus sign. It will add to the area. And if you need to take away Option, you can hold down the Alt Option key and then click and drag the areas you want to take away from the selection, and it'll do that as well. So now that I have this selected, I can click over this area and drag it to another area where I want it to use that part to heal. Alright, let's hit Command D to deselect, and that looks pretty darn good. Okay, so now I'm going to try doing this area over here. Let's pull it down here, Command D. It looks okay, but this edge right here doesn't look that great, so let me just do this little area. That's looking a lot better. Alright, and now I'm going to try doing this under eye area. All right, looking pretty good there. Let's see, right here's looking a little funky. All right, let's do a before and after. All right, so very subtle, but once you turn that on and off, you realize what a big difference it actually makes. So let's go ahead and do that to this side now. And that doesn't look all that great, so let's try moving this here. It's looking okay. All right, not too shabby. Let's move up here. Ooh, not good. Command Z, undo. Let's try it down here a little bit. No, Command Z, undo. No, doesn't look good. So this is a time where we might have to break it up into smaller pieces. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. And I'm going to start with this area right over here. And so what's happening is that it's picking up a lot of the hairs right over here. So you might need to pull it over here instead. Let's try. Okay, that's doing better. There's less hairs, and I think I took out some more of the hairs that were on her face on this side. So let's try going this way. And let's try down here. Let's try over here. All right, that's not looking too bad. Let's see this little area here. Now it's not perfect, but we are going to be adding a little bit of blur to the skin. So I'm trying to get it as good as possible, but we are going to blur the skin a little bit. So don't have to get it perfectly done. All right, so that's starting to look a little better. So we've taken care of those areas. Actually gonna do this side a little bit more. And this is all stuff that kind of takes like practice to kind of see. You might not be seeing the same issues that I'm exactly seeing, and it just comes from doing this for a long time. All right. So we took care of those under eye issues and some of that glare stuff going on. Not too shabby. All right, so let's keep moving on down. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and do our skin softening by using a blur. So again, we're going to make a new, layer, Command J, and double click on here and put in skin blur. All right, and so we are going to actually put a filter on this entire layer to blur the entire layer, and then I'm going to use a layer mask to only show the areas that I want to be blurred. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go up here to filter, come on down to blur, and we're going to go ahead and use Gaussian blur. And let me zoom in a little bit. We don't want to go this far. Let's go down to like 2 pixels. And right here, this little screen that we're seeing here, you can actually choose where to put it. So let's say we need it over here instead. Here we go. All right. Let's go ahead and stick with around 2 pixels. 1.9 is fine. Okay, but we don't want the whole thing blurry. We just want her skin to have this blur on it. So I'm going to add a layer mask by clicking on the layer mask icon. And I'm actually going to, instead of brushing away all the areas I don't want the blur, I'm going to start off by turning this entire mask black. How you do that is hold down Command and click on I. So now that you have it inversed, all of that, that entire layer is not visible on top of everything else. So what we need to do now is pull up our brush, And if your background and foreground layers aren't black and white, it's a good time to go ahead and switch it to that. So we have black, and then if you click on this background layer one, we have white. That works perfectly. And I'm telling you this because as you're going and maybe you brush over a place you didn't mean to, you can actually hit X to toggle back and forth between black and white quickly. So this is going to help you get faster at doing this kind of stuff. So now I'm going to go ahead and just brush over all the areas that I do want to be blurry, which is her skin. And if I want to be able to see where I'm brushing, I can hit the backslash button. And when I do that, it did change it. So if I hit X, it goes back to the white. And I can start brushing over all of this area. And so if I go overboard a little bit, I can hit X, go back. Okay, and just for a minute, I'm going to change my cursor because this is really hard for me to do with my giant cursor. Okay, that's a little bit easier. All right, so let's go in here. And you're just going to basically go over all the areas of her skin that you do want blurred. All right, I'm going to keep working on this and speed up the video a little bit. This may take a while. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I might need to, I turned off my mask so I can see what's going on, and I'm just going to come in here and get a couple little details. But you know, try not to go over any areas that you want nice and sharp. We are going to do a sharpening layer later, but you don't want to go over like any eyelashes or any of these, like, you know, her teeth or the little edge of her nose, her jewelry, stuff like that. You want to keep that stuff nice and sharp. All right, not too bad. And if you might be thinking like, I don't really see a big difference, it's a subtle difference. If you turn the layer on and off, you'll be able to see. Now, if you went too far on your blur, let's say on that slider when we first did this, you can take the opacity down in order to change the blur, the amount of blur that's coming through. So that's the other nice thing of having this on a separate layer. Okay, let me take my cursor size back up so you guys can see. All right. So now let's go ahead and do a little bit of teeth whitening. Okay, so now we're going to start with the teeth whitening. And if you remember, we're not going to do this on the skin blur layer. Everything that is covered by the mask, you won't be able to do anything on there. So we need to actually make a copy of the patch tool layer, Command J, and we're going to rename this as teeth whitening. All right, let's go ahead and zoom in, and we're going to use the sponge tool. The sponge tool is going to be under your dodge and burn tools. So right over here, we have the sponge tool. You can also hit O. And we're going to leave the mode to desaturate, and we're going to leave the flow at 5. We want to leave it low so we don't go crazy and desaturate super fast. And I'm just going to lightly go over some of these areas where it's kind of yellowy, and her teeth aren't really that bad. They're pretty white. It's just these little areas around here where there's a little bit of black. And we're not doing huge changes. We're just doing a little bit of whitening for her. Now, this is just one method of doing this. As I said before, there are tons of ways to do all kinds of the same thing over and over. There are tons of ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. This is just one method. All right, let's zoom out and see how we're looking. Not too shabby. All right. So now that we've whitened her teeth up a bit, we can turn this on and off to see the difference. And those areas are a bit whiter now. Yay. Okay, so let's go ahead. Now, again, if you go overboard, you can take the opacity of the layer down and so that you can adjust it a bit. Let's go ahead and go to lightening the eyes. All right, so let's go ahead and do some eye lightening a little bit. Now for this, we're going to use an exposure adjustment layer with a mask to just very slightly lighten. So let's go ahead and add that. If we come up here, we have the exposure. And then I'm going to take the exposure up. And as I'm taking it up, you can see that it's taking up all of the areas. It's looking really funky because we have this skin blur layer above it. But we're going to actually be adding a layer mask, so it's only going to be hitting the white, so don't worry about that for now. Okay, let's go ahead and invert this exposure layer by hitting Command-I. And let's bring up our brush. We want to be painting in white to reveal. Zoom in on her eyes. Go ahead and close that. And we're just going to brush over her eyes here. Okay, so we can turn that on and off, and you can see we just very slightly brightened her eyes up a bit. All right, next we want to do a bit of sharpening. So again, there's lots of ways to be able to do this, but what I'm going to show you how to do is we're going to do a stamp visible layer, which is kind of like taking a screenshot of everything we've done. So that's holding down Command, Alt-Option key, Shift, and E. Okay, so here we have our stamp visible, and I'm going to rename this as Sharpening. And now we can do whatever sharpening you would like to do for this. We're going to go over more sharpening styles later on in the semester. For now, we're just going to do Smart Sharpen. So let's go ahead and go up to Filter, Sharpen, and Smart Sharpen. Okay, let's go somewhere where we want detail that's like her eyes. And this is looking pretty good, just right where it is. You can play with this if you want, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it. And you can see there's just a very slight amount of sharpening happening. You can click the preview on and off. You can leave your amount to about 100%, that's fine, and click OK. So while we're waiting for this, the next step I'm going to take is I'm going to add a layer mask, and I'm just going to invert it, and I just want to have this sharpening happen on very certain areas to really make her features pop. So that's going to be like her eyes, maybe her jewelry, a little bit of her hair, and probably her lips. Okay, so let's go ahead and add our layer mask. Now, another way that we can do this is we actually want the opposite of her skin blur to be what is being sharpened. So what I can do is I can take the skin blur mask, hold down the Option key to click and drag, and you can see that double arrow. It's making a copy of the mask. Replace layer mask, yes. Now this isn't what we want right now. We want the opposite of this, because right now it's sharpening her skin, which we don't want. We just blurred her skin. So we want the opposite to be sharpened. So I'm going to hit Command-I to invert. And now you can see the mask is the exact opposite. And everywhere that is sharpened is actually the areas. Let's zoom in on her eye here real quick. And you can see the little bit of sharpening that's happened. Now, if you go a little overboard, again, you can take the opacity down so the sharpening is a little less, or if at this point you're like the skin blur is a little bit too much, I can take the opacity down of that. So it all kind of blends together. All right, we're looking pretty good. All right, and another issue was, my distracting background. So if we turn this back on, we took care of this, we took care of all of these, but I do have my distracting background still. So we can try to, do all kinds of things like clone stamp it and such, but in this case, I'm okay with just doing a quick crop. So I'm going to pull up my crop tool. And I'm just going to leave it as, if I leave it on ratio and hit clear, then I can play with it however I want. It won't constrain the ratio in any way. I can pull this in to get rid of that gray area. Okay, that's looking good. Alrighty. Real quick, I'm going to go ahead and save this since we've done so much work. And when I click save from this, it's going to come up with asking me how I want to save it. Automatically it says PSD Photoshop. So I'm going to name this with my last name, my first name, the project name, which is this photo. That's fine. And I'm actually going to add an underscore and working to the end. So I know that this is my working file with all of my layers. I hit save and hit OK. All right, we're looking good. So a couple other things we can do. I can add a custom vignette. So one way of doing that would be, let's say, by adding a solid color, adjustment layer. I can go to black and hit OK. And then on my layer mask, bring up my brush. Let's get a big brush and with completely feathered, no hardness. So I brushed around to try to add my vignette, but I'm on my layer mask. If I have white, it's just adding white, which is revealing, which is already what it's doing. So I need to hit X to go to black. And add that there. Okay, and now I can take this and take the opacity down to a place I like it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now it's bringing all the attention straight to her face. Nice. Okay, what else did I add on here? Okay, so this is something that you can try doing as well. We can add a little bit of lipstick to her. So let's come back here, and we're going to do this using a hue saturation adjustment layer. So here's the hue saturation adjustment layer. Let me make my brush smaller. Okay, and I'm actually going to do my mask first. So I'm going to hit Command I to invert my mask. Okay, then I'm going to get my brush tool up, and I want to reveal with white. So I'm going to hit X to turn to white. I'm going to hit my backslash button so I can see where I'm actually brushing over, and I'm going to go over her lips. Now this doesn't have to be completely perfect the first time. We can always go back and make it better later, but I just want to see the color I'm going to be applying to the lips, and then I'm going to go back in and play with the mask a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to hit the backslash button again. And so now only her lips are going to be affected by this layer. So we can play with the hue. And I'm going to go with something, let's see. That's looking pretty. Maybe a little bit here. Play with the saturation. Play with the lightness. And you can turn it on and off to see how you're doing. Okay, that's a nice little extra tint to her lips. Now let's go back in and fix the layer mask. All right, not too bad. And of course, if you want to change the color, you messed up, you can go back in here and change it. You can also, if it's too bright, maybe take down the opacity a little bit. It is up to you. All right. So now that I'm done, I can hit Command S to save. It's just going to save as this PSD again. Oops, I hit it when I was over here. While I'm in Photoshop, I can hit Command S to save, and now it's saving. You can see it says saving right up there. And my working file is saving. So now, to turn this in, I need to have all of my layers open. If you can't see all of your layers, you can click to drag this and make it larger, or pull it up here. Let's see, I just moved these around instead. Let's close this tab group real quick. Let me go ahead and close this tab group. Okay, now we can see all my layers. I'm going to open my history panel and click and drag this down so we can see all the history. I'm going to take my screenshot, and it's ready to turn in. Okay, so you should have spent quite a bit of time, as you notice that this is the only assignment for this week and it's worth 50 points instead of 25. So make sure that you went through all the steps.